Hey, Service Advisor Nation, what's happening? What's going on? Thank you for tuning into another episode of the AutoFix Advisor Cast with your host, Michael Doherty. Hopefully, everybody's doing well, everybody's healthy, all that good stuff. It's toward the end of March, and I'd say daylight savings time is here. Spring is here. The grass is growing. It's raining a lot. Probably my fault. I've been getting my cars washed, and it's probably causing it to rain. So my apologies. But in any event, um, I've been talking to a lot of independent shops lately over the phone. And when I'm getting on that phone call or that Zoom meeting call and anticipating, what I'm going to say to that new prospect or client to talk to them about some things about their shop, kind of for a better word, kind of pre-framing it in my head, what I want to talk about based on the information I've gotten from them. But once I get on the call, I'm finding that they're anything but engaged. They're anything but listening a lot of the time, and it's fastly becoming a pet peeve. I know it's not personal, but it got me thinking about from a service advisor's perspective of you know engagement with a client when you're speaking with them, whether they're calling in about making the appointment, whether you're talking to them. And this is obviously, it's not text format, it's not email format. It's like, on the phone talking to them. Are they engaged? Are you both, yourself, the service advisor, and the client? Are you participating in active listening? And reason I say that is, I think it's very important to talk about that because from a service advisor's perspective, again, we got so much going on. And as soon as you get off that phone call, you got something else that you're going to need to do, whether it's pick up the phone again, put the information in the, computer that you just spoke to the client about, or as you're talking to them, do that. But, I'm finding especially these days with a lot of people that, work from home or involved in the shop that I'm speaking to, they're not really engaged. There isn't a lot of active listening, and it poses a problem. I've come to my senses lately, and basically I'm asking people, hey, it's just is now not a good time, to talk about this. I really want to go over these things with you, but you seem preoccupied. And it's okay to say that. I don't think it's rude. And I've experienced that too as a service advisor. Mr. and Mrs. Jones, we're going to talk about some things about your vehicle. Is now a good time to talk? And he or she will say yeah. And then as you start talking, you hear background noise. They're talking to somebody, and especially when you're talking about expensive repairs, or it doesn't have to be expensive, but just when you're talking about people's vehicles and trying to get across to them specific information, I think it's very important again that there's active listening going on. From the service advisor's perspective, if that client does not seem like they're engaged, if there's not a lot of active listening going on, don't feel bad. Pause, don't say anything, and you're going to hear on the other end of the phone, hello, you still there? Reply, yeah, I'm still here. I was just waiting for you to finish up, what you were doing. It's kind of a way of saying, hey, I've stopped talking because you're not paying attention. So it's also okay to call somebody out professionally, but say, hey, it seems like you're very preoccupied. These things are very important. Is there a good time for me to call you back? It's okay to do that. But from the service advisor's perspective, when a client is calling in, depending on the circumstance, somebody might be a little more spirited in talking to you about their car if, it's an emergency or something like that. But again, practicing active listening, and kind of what does that look like? So I think first and foremost, it's just being patient, right? It's when that phone rings, again, whatever you got going on, if you're going to, as a service advisor, pick up that phone and commit to answering that phone. Hey, thanks for calling XYZ Automotive. This is Michael. Thank you so much for calling in. How can I help you? If you've engaged in that phone call, you really have to kind of clear your brain and, listen to what they're telling you and, repeat it back to them. That's the part of it I really believe that gets people's attention, that you are paying attention to them instead of saying, okay, yep, sure, yeah, as they're talking. Just let them talk, let them explain what's going on. And, definitely reply back, okay, so what you're telling me is, again, repeat it back to them. Because I've often found times too where I've repeated it back to somebody and they go, "Oh no, that's not it. It's this or it's that." So again, you're repeating it back to them, and also asking clarity, asking qualifying or clarifying questions, right? You know as they're talking, but think about what you're going to say before you say it to them, and okay, so what you're telling me, Mr. Jones, is your vehicle overheated and you want to get it towed in and we do not recommend you drive it and xyz. So again, asking clarifying questions about what's happening with their vehicle, and again, just active listening and being engaged, and it works for both parties, right? So again, from a service advisor perspective, if you're going to pick up that phone and commit to answering that phone, you know do it in a sense that shows the prospect or the client that you are definitely paying attention to them. The other side of that, I think, is adaptability. As a service advisor, adaptability in handling unexpected situations and changes, and that could be the day before you had 10 appointments coming in, right? Or the next day, you got 10 appointments coming in and you come in that morning and, only 4 or 5 people show up, right? I mean, what's the game plan? It kind of changes, the workflow for the day. If there's vehicles that were towed in overnight unexpectedly, night drops that you were anticipating as appointments, right? How do we handle those things from an adaptability standpoint and still helping the client without feeling overwhelmed, right? So I think a large part of that is just, setting expectations and being transparent with the clients about those situations. And again, the answer is always yes, we want to help you out, Mr. or Mrs. Jones, or client. But at the same time, they don't need to know everything you've got going on in the shop. You don't need to tell them, hey, right now I've got 2 cars up on the lift. I'm not expecting parts for one for mid, till later on today. I'm not going to be able to get to your car. But one of our technicians, John, he's out today, and then the other technician, Tim, he's got a doctor's appointment in a couple hours, so he may not be here to look at it. They don't want to hear any of that stuff. They want to hear, yes, that you're going to accommodate them, that you're going to relieve them of their problem, and they can drop off their car. But again, expectations. All you got to say is, hey, you know, I'm not able to, just be clear, you're welcome to drop it off. However, based on our current schedule, I'm not going to be able to look at it today. I'm pretty confident of that, but there's a high opportunity that I'll be able to get it in first thing in the morning, and I'll probably get you an update between 9 or 10 o'clock, right? So again, you don't need to go into the whole XYZ of what's going on at the shop, and nobody wants to hear that. It's none of their business. They really don't care. I'm just being honest. Just kind of more to the point. And being able to adapt and handle to those situations. In shop stuff as well. Parts issues. If a part shows up and the day before you made a promise time to the client and you find out that that part that came in is not correct or it's broken or you're going to need another part, you know, get in touch with that client as soon as possible and let them know what's going on. Hey, we had a parts issue and we're not going to be able to get another part until tomorrow. I just want to be transparent. Are you okay to hang in that loaner car for the evening? Or are you going to need to come by and get a car? Or however, how can you accommodate them? How can you make it easier for them if they were expecting the car that day? You don't have to really spend money to do that. I'm not saying go rent them a car or something, but again, just I've never had an issue, honest to God, with a client as long as I've been proactive in communicating what's going on with their vehicle and you're meeting the times that you told them that you'd update them. So again, things change, life happens, it's okay, but it's how you're handling it, adaptability. And one thing too, I think is important to talk about is, identifying customer needs, and recommending appropriate services. So, if somebody's coming in for just a regular service or maintenance, if your shop is doing a digital vehicle inspection, after you've done the oil service or the technician has done the oil service, sent you the DVI as a service advisor, you're writing up, you're looking at things, when you're calling that client, obviously number one, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Jones, the oil service is in process or it's been completed. We did a digital vehicle inspection for you. And here are some things that the technician noted. I really would recommend, as a service advisor, you break that down in 3 categories, right? So their primary concern, what they came in for, number one. Number two, anything that's safety with the vehicle, paramount, right? We want to let them know about that stuff. And number three, kind of extra service or maintenance or anything that wouldn't be considered safety or their primary concern. And I have had the situation before where, somebody's come in and allotted, a chunk of change, $1,000 for, a BMW service or maintenance or Mercedes service or maintenance. And the technician's got that vehicle up in the air and he's doing the oil service on it, and he notices that the front brakes, they're worn down to 2 millimeters, or it's got a really hellacious oil leak coming out of the front end or something like that. So I'm calling that client back and I'm saying, hey, before we get started on this other service or maintenance that you've authorized, I just want to let you know that your front brakes are really in need of being replaced. I've prepared an estimate for you, and I want to let you know about that before we get started on this other work that you have authorized. Because that money, if they don't have any extra money to purchase additional services from you, I would really recommend putting that money toward that brake service. That is going to benefit you better at this service visit. We can still do the other service or maintenance, but what would you like to do? Repurpose that money that they've allocated you toward things that are going to really help them, and things that are safety. So I think there's a bond there. They're seeing you're looking out for them. There's trust built there. And again, we are building and maintaining client relationships, very important. So again, it's nice to get all the kind of, we call it, I guess, gravy, right? The service and maintenance stuff. But again, if they've got a laundry list of things that they've authorized and you haven't done the DVI yet, if they're coming in for a 30, 60, 90K, whatever, and it's a chunk of change, do the DVI, do the oil service, get the oil drain and do the DVI, and then ask the technician to send you that DVI back before they get started on those other items. And again, use their money responsibly, right? Look out for them. And I guarantee you, if they can, they're going to do the other stuff as well, but they're going to remember that you didn't do all the other things and then tell them about their breaks that they can't afford. So, again, just building and maintaining client relationships there. So really important. But again, going back, active listening, engaged, right? Are we paying attention? And still, I think with the active listening too is, comprehension. Are we comprehending what people are telling us? Because somebody's explanation of something may not be the way you're interpreting it. And it's okay to say, hey, I'm not understanding completely what you're telling me, just so we're on the same page. Could you mention that again, right? And if it doesn't line up, it's okay to disagree, but do it professionally, right? So again, there's definite, comprehension in the understanding of what somebody's telling you too for active listening. If you're just not sure, don't guess. Just, hey, when it's your turn to speak, I am not sure. And that goes with service advisors talking to technicians as well. I've been out in the shop before and technicians telling me X, Y, and Z. And I'm just, I'm standing there and I'm like, yeah, I kind of get what you're saying, but could you show me? Could you bring me over to the car? Could you show me exactly what you're talking about? Oh, okay, that makes sense. Yep, now I got it, right? So again, comprehension of what you're being told from a client, from a coworker, from a technician, it goes a long way and it'll help you sharpen your skills as well. But Service Advisor Nation, appreciate you. We also appreciate our sponsor, WorldPack, and look forward to seeing you next episode. And again, really appreciate y'all and take it easy. All right. See you later.